If I could go back and give one book to my 14-year-old self, it would be Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Because it breaks down exactly what school never taught us about how money actually works. Whether you've read the book or not, this video breaks down all 7 lessons in detail. Everything you need to understand why some people build wealth while others stay stuck, no matter how hard they work. Robert Kiyosaki's biological father had a PhD. He was the head of education for the entire state of Hawaii. Respected, intelligent, successful by every traditional measure. He followed the rules perfectly, but he died broke. His best friend's father dropped out of school in 8th grade. No college degree, no impressive credentials. By all conventional standards, he should have been the one struggling. He became one of the richest men in Hawaii. Same island, same economy, same opportunities, completely opposite results. The difference wasn't intelligence. It wasn't work ethic. It wasn't luck. It was how they understood money. One man spent his life working for money. The other built systems that made money work for him. The real gut punch? Most of us are living Poor Dad's life by default, because that's exactly what we were programmed to do. School taught us to trade hours for dollars, to climb someone else's ladder, to follow the same script our parents followed, and their parents before them. Generation after generation, caught in the same cycle. Why? Because nobody reveals the game the wealthy actually play. Rich Dad, Poor Dad breaks that cycle. No fluff, no empty motivation, just the raw principles that separate those who chase money from those who command it. In this video, I'm breaking down the 7 core lessons from Robert Kiyosaki's classic that completely shift how you think about wealth. These aren't just ideas, they're the exact mindset separates that separate the financially free from the financially trapped. Stay until the end because lesson number 7 is the one most people miss, and it's the difference between working until you're 65 and designing the life you actually want. This is your exit strategy from the trap. So let's begin. Lesson 1. The rich don't work for money. The story begins when Robert was just 9 years old. He attended a public school where most of the kids came from wealthy families. One day, his classmates were excitedly talking about spending the weekend at a beach house owned by one of the richer students' families. Robert and Mike weren't invited. It became painfully clear to them that they were excluded because they came from the poor side of town. This experience stung deeply and planted a seed of determination in both boys. That weekend, feeling hurt and curious, Robert came home and asked his poor dad the question that would change his life. "Dad, how do I become rich?" His father, though educated and well-meaning, could only offer generic advice. "You have to learn how to make more money, son." Even at 9 years old, Robert understood that this answer was too vague to be helpful. It was the kind of advice that sounded good but provided no real direction or actionable steps. Poor Dad, recognizing his own limitations when it came to teaching about wealth, made an important suggestion. He told Robert to go talk to Mike's father. Robert and Mike were both surprised by this recommendation. After all, Mike's dad wasn't rich yet. He was just a regular businessman who had dropped out of school and ran a few small businesses. He didn't live in a mansion or drive fancy cars. But Poor Dad saw something in him, a quality of understanding money that he himself didn't possess. When Robert and Mike went to meet Rich Dad, they didn't know what to expect. They knocked on the door nervously, 2 young boys hoping to learn the secrets of becoming wealthy. Rich Dad opened the door and got straight to the point. He asked them if they were ready to learn how to make money. Their heads nodded enthusiastically, filled with excitement and hope. But then Rich Dad made an unusual offer that would test their commitment from the very start. He said he would teach them, but not in the way they learned at school. There would be no classroom, no textbooks, no lectures. Instead, they would have to work for him. According to Rich Dad, he would be wasting his time if they just wanted to sit and listen passively like they did in school. Real learning, he believed, came from doing, from experiencing, from being in the game rather than watching from the sidelines. Before Robert could even ask a question or discuss the terms, Rich Dad cut him off. He said if they couldn't make up their minds decisively right then and there, they would never learn to make money anyway. This was their first lesson, though they didn't realize it yet. Opportunities come and go quickly, and being able to make fast decisions is a critical skill for success. Life doesn't wait for people who need time to think things over endlessly. Robert and Mike looked at each other, communicating silently in the way close friends do. They both knew this was their chance. Even though they didn't fully understand what they were agreeing to, they said yes. Rich Dad smiled, pleased with their decisiveness. He told them they would be paid 10 cents an hour and would work 3 hours every Saturday morning. That first Saturday, Robert had a softball game scheduled with his school team. It was something he had been looking forward to all week. But he made the choice to skip the game and show up for work instead. He understood, even at that young age, that this opportunity to learn about money was more important than a single game. He didn't want to waste his chance. Robert and Mike started working for Mrs. Martin, one of Rich Dad's employees who managed a small convenience store. These were the kinds of neighborhood stores common in the 1950s where people would buy everyday essentials like milk, bread, butter, and cigarettes. The store was old-fashioned and didn't have air conditioning, which meant the doors had to stay wide open to the street and parking lot. Every time a car drove by, dust would swirl up from the unpaved parking area and settle on everything inside the store. Their job was mind-numbingly simple and boring. They had to take every canned good off the shelves, carefully brush off the dust with a feather duster, and then res-tack them neatly, can by can, shelf by shelf for 3 hours straight. It was repetitive, tedious work that required no skill and offered no mental stimulation. They did this every Saturday morning. Their payment? 30 cents total for 3 hours of work. In those days, a single comic book cost 10 cents. So after working for 3 hours, they could each buy just 1.5 comic books. It wasn't exactly exciting compensation for two young boys who had dreams of becoming rich. Despite the meager pay and boring work, Robert and Mike stuck with it because they believed Rich Dad would eventually teach them something valuable. They were waiting for the lesson, for the big reveal, for the moment when Rich Dad would sit them down and explain the secrets of making money. 3 weeks passed. 3 long Saturdays of the same boring routine. Robert had seen Rich Dad only once since that first meeting, and that was just a brief hello in passing. There had been no teaching, no lessons, no explanations. Just dust, cans, and 10 cents an hour. By the 4th Saturday, Robert had reached his breaking point. During their lunch break, he told Mike that he was done. He was quitting. School was already boring enough without spending his precious Saturdays doing mindless work for almost no money. He felt used, like a slave, and he was angry that Rich Dad hadn't kept his promise to teach them. To Robert's surprise, Mike just smiled when he announced he was quitting. Mike told him that his father had expected this to happen. In fact, Rich Dad had specifically told Mike to bring Robert to see him when he was ready to quit. This revelation made Robert even angrier. It meant Rich Dad had been manipulating the situation from the start, deliberately creating this frustration. But Mike explained that his father's way of teaching was completely different from what Robert's parents or teachers did. Rich Dad didn't believe in lectures and explanations. He believed in using real experiences to teach lessons that would stick for a lifetime. Robert agreed to meet with Rich Dad the following Saturday, though he was still angry and skeptical. Even Robert's poor dad was upset about the situation. When Robert told him what had been happening, poor Dad felt that Rich Dad was exploiting child labor and treating them unfairly. He advised Robert to demand a raise to at least 25 cents an hour, and if Rich Dad refused, to quit immediately and never go back. The next Saturday, when Robert arrived at Rich Dad's house for their meeting, he was made to wait, and wait, and wait. For 45 minutes, he sat there watching Rich Dad's employees come and go, seeing Rich Dad walk past him several times without acknowledgement. By the time Rich Dad finally called him in, Robert was seething with frustration and anger. Robert unleashed his pent-up emotions. He accused Rich Dad of being greedy, of exploiting him and Mike, of breaking his promise to teach them, and of showing no respect for his workers. He said that Rich Dad had not kept his end of the bargain and demanded to either be taught properly or be paid much more money. Rich Dad listened calmly to this outburst. Then he asked Robert a simple question. "When you say I should teach you, do you mean I should lecture you or give you a talk?" Robert nodded yes, that's exactly what he meant. Rich Dad smiled and began to explain his philosophy of teaching. He told Robert that life is the best teacher of all, much better than any lecture or book. Most of the time, life doesn't talk to you or explain things nicely. Instead, life pushes you around, creates challenges, puts obstacles in your path. How you respond to that push determines everything. Some people, Rich Dad explained, let life push them around endlessly. They become passive victims, always complaining about bad luck or unfair circumstances but never changing their situation. Others fight back against life's push, but they fight the wrong things. They get angry at their boss, their job, their spouse, the economy, the government, always looking for someone or something external to blame. They might change jobs or relationships, but because they never change themselves, the same patterns repeat. But then there's a third group, a rare group. These people welcome life's push. They see it as a message, a lesson, an opportunity to learn and grow. They understand that the discomfort they feel is trying to teach them something important. These are the people who become successful, who break free from the patterns that trap everyone else. Rich Dad then revealed his strategy. He told Robert that he had over 150 employees working for him. Not a single one of them had ever asked him to teach them about money. They came looking for jobs and paychecks, never questioning the purpose of their work or thinking about how to improve their financial situation. They wanted security, not knowledge. They wanted comfort, not growth. But when Mike told him that both he and Robert wanted to learn how to make money, Rich Dad saw something special. He decided to create a real-life learning experience that would teach them lessons no classroom ever could. He deliberately paid them almost nothing, just 10 cents an hour, because he wanted them to feel the same frustration and anger that most employees feel. He wanted them to experience what it's like to work hard and feel undervalued. The crucial question was, what would they learn from that experience? Would they just get angry and quit like most people would? Would they demand more money, thinking that would solve the problem? Or would they see deeper, understanding the real lesson hidden in the situation? When Rich Dad asked Robert what he had learned from working for such a low wage, Robert could only complain about Rich Dad's greed and poor treatment of workers. He even threatened to quit if Rich Dad didn't pay him more or teach him properly. Rich Dad nodded knowingly. He explained that this was exactly what most people do throughout their entire lives. They experience financial frustration, and their only solution is to demand more money, a raise, a better job, a higher salary. But more money rarely solves the underlying problem because the problem isn't the amount of money. It's the person's relationship with money and their understanding of how money works. Most people, Rich Dad explained, wait for raises and think that more money will solve their problems. But that's just temporary relief. A raise might help for a few months, but expenses rise to match income, and soon they're back in the same position, just with bigger numbers. The cycle never ends because they never learn to make money work for them. Robert was starting to understand. The lesson wasn't about getting paid more for the same work. The lesson was about thinking differently about money entirely. Rich Dad asked Robert if he still had passion and desire to learn. When Robert said yes, Rich Dad dropped another bombshell. He was going to stop paying Robert completely. From now on, he would work for free. Robert was stunned and confused. He had come demanding a raise, and now he was being told he would earn nothing at all. But Rich Dad explained that if Robert wanted to learn how to make real money, he needed to use his head and figure things out for himself. Giving him more money would only teach him to be a better employee. Making him work for free would force him to think like an entrepreneur. For the next 3 weeks, Robert and Mike worked every Saturday for no pay at all. They dusted those same cans, restocked those same shelves, but now without even the meager reward of 30 cents. It was during this time that something shifted in how they thought about work and money. One Saturday, Rich Dad showed up and took the boys outside for ice cream. As they walked down the street eating their cones, Rich Dad asked if they had learned anything yet. They admitted they hadn't. Rich Dad told them they'd better start thinking fast because the lesson was staring them right in the face. To illustrate his point, Rich Dad asked the boys to look around at the people in the park and walking by. He pointed to Mrs. Martin, who had worked for him for years. He asked them if the life these people were living seemed exciting. Most of them worked hard their entire lives for modest pay, clinging to the illusion of job security, looking forward to a 3-week vacation each year, and hoping for a small pension after 45 years of service. Rich Dad told them that if this kind of life excited them, he would be willing to give them a raise. In fact, he'd give them 25 cents an hour. The moment he said this, both boys felt their hearts skip a beat. 25 cents an hour. That would be enormous. More than double what they had been making. They could buy so many comic books, maybe even save up for a new bicycle. It was tempting, incredibly tempting. But they managed to say no, though their voices were shaky. Seeing their resistance, Rich Dad raised his offer to $1 an hour. Robert's mind started exploding with possibilities. $1 an hour. That was serious money for a kid. He could imagine himself becoming the richest kid in the neighborhood. Then Rich Dad raised it to $2 an hour. At this point, Robert's heart was pounding so hard he thought it might burst through his chest. His brain was screaming at him to take the offer. $2 an hour would make him wealthier than any kid he knew. He could picture a new bicycle, a new baseball glove, the admiration of his friends when he flashed cash around. Every cell in his body wanted to shout, "Yes!" But somehow, mysteriously, his mouth stayed shut. The word wouldn't come out. Rich Dad was watching them carefully. He saw two young boys staring back at him with wide eyes and empty expressions, clearly struggling with internal conflict. He knew this was the critical moment. He understood human nature, that every person has a weak, needy part of their soul that can be bought with money, promises, or security. But every person also has a resilient, principled part that refuses to be bought at any price. The question was always which part would win. So Rich Dad made his final offer, $5 an hour. This was an astronomical sum for a child in the 1950s. It was probably more than many adults earned. For a moment, the boys' eyes lit up with that same desire and greed. But then something changed. Their expressions transformed from excited and desperate to calm and peaceful. It was as if a switch had flipped inside them. The temptation disappeared in an instant. They had found the part of their soul that couldn't be bought, and in that moment, it became stronger than their fear and greed. Rich Dad smiled broadly. He told them it was good that they didn't have a price. Most people do have a price, he explained, because they allow their lives to be controlled by two emotions: fear and greed. Rich Dad then explained the trap that catches most people. Fear of not having money, fear of being poor, fear of not being able to pay bills. This fear makes people get up every morning and go to work. It drives them to accept jobs they don't really want, to tolerate bosses they don't respect, to spend the best hours of their days doing things that don't fulfill them. Fear is the stick that beats them forward. But once they earn a paycheck, the second emotion takes over: greed. Suddenly they start thinking about all the wonderful things money could buy. A new car, a bigger house, designer clothes, expensive restaurants, exotic vacations. Greed makes them see all these possibilities, and it creates a hunger for more. More money, more things, more status. Greed is the carrot dangling in front of them, always just out of reach. So the pattern becomes: fear drives them to work hard and earn money. Greed makes them spend that money and want even more. Money runs out. Fear returns, stronger than before. Back to work they go, earning another paycheck. Greed kicks in again, and they spend it chasing happiness and satisfaction that never quite comes. The money disappears. Fear resurfaces, and the cycle repeats over and over and over. This is what Rich Dad called the rat race. Just like a rat running on a wheel, people run faster and faster, working harder and harder, but they never actually get anywhere. They might get raises, promotions, bigger paychecks, but because their expenses rise to match their income and because fear and greed still control their decisions, they remain trapped. Some people run this race at $30,000 a year, others at $300,000 a year, but they're all running the same race. Mike asked if there was another way, a way to escape the rat race. Rich Dad said yes, absolutely, but not many people find it because most people never stop long enough to question the race they're running. They're too busy working, too busy earning, too busy spending, too caught up in the fear and greed to step back and see the bigger picture. Mike wanted to know what that other way was. Rich Dad said they would learn it gradually while working for him, even without pay. The work itself wasn't the point. The thinking, the observing, the questioning was the point. Mike pressed for a hint. Rich Dad told them that the first step was to tell the truth. When asked what truth, he replied that it was the truth about their feelings. They needed to be completely honest with themselves, not necessarily with others, about how they felt about money, work, fear, and greed. Rich Dad expressed doubt that most people, including his employees, were capable of this kind of honest self-reflection. Instead of acknowledging their fear, they simply react to it emotionally rather than logically. They don't confront their fears. They run from them. They don't examine their greed. They justify it. Their emotions end up controlling their thoughts and actions, rather than the other way around. When people refuse to acknowledge this truth, money ends up governing their lives. Money controls their emotions, their choices, their relationships, their stress levels, their happiness. They become slaves to money, though they would never admit it. Most people would claim they work because they want to, because they enjoy it, because they're building a career. But the uncomfortable truth is that fear of not having money is what really drives them. Rich Dad urged Robert and Mike to avoid this trap at all costs. Simply being rich, he warned, wouldn't solve the problem either. Wealthy people can be just as trapped by fear and greed as poor people, sometimes even more so. When Robert asked why being rich wouldn't solve the problem, Rich Dad introduced the other side of the equation. He explained that desire and greed are also powerful forces. It's natural and even healthy to want things that are better, prettier, newer, more exciting. That desire motivates progress and improvement. We work hard partly because we desire better lives for ourselves and our families. But the problem is that money brings only temporary happiness. People think buying something new will make them happy, and it does for a little while. But that happiness fades quickly, and then they're looking at the next thing to buy, the next goal to reach, the next milestone that will finally bring them lasting satisfaction. But it never does. Rich Dad pointed out that many wealthy people are actually driven more by fear than poor people are. They fear losing what they've accumulated. They fear other people trying to take their money. They fear economic downturns, bad investments, lawsuits, theft. Sometimes they become more anxious and stressed as they get richer, not less. The real solution, Rich Dad explained, is to learn to think clearly despite being emotionally charged. It's about recognizing when fear and greed are influencing you, acknowledging those feelings honestly, but then making logical decisions rather than emotional ones. This is incredibly difficult because emotions are powerful and often unconscious. Rich Dad told the boys to continue working for free and to keep using their brains. He promised that soon their minds would show them ways of making money far beyond what he could ever pay them as employees. They would begin to see opportunities that others couldn't see, and once they saw one opportunity, they would see them everywhere for the rest of their lives. Robert and Mike took this advice seriously. They continued working, but now they were observing everything around them with new eyes. They watched how the store operated, how customers behaved, what sold and what didn't, where money came from and where it went. After a few weeks, they noticed something interesting. The store clerk would tear the front covers off unsold comic books and throw the comics in the trash. A distributor would come by in the evening, collect these torn covers as proof that the comics hadn't sold, and provide new ones on consignment. The old comics were supposed to be destroyed. One day, Robert got up the courage to ask the distributor what happened to all those thrown-away comics. The distributor said they were sent to a recycling plant to be destroyed. Robert asked if they could have them instead. The distributor agreed on one condition: they could never sell the comics. Robert quickly agreed. Soon Robert and Mike were collecting dozens of comic books every week. They set up a small library in Mike's basement. They advertised to kids in their neighborhood. For just 10 cents, kids could come and read as many comics as they wanted for 2 hours. This was an incredible deal. One new comic book cost 10 cents, but it might take only 10 to 15 minutes to read. For the same 10 cents, kids could read 5 or 6 comics at their library, getting 6 times the value. Kids flocked to their library, but Robert and Mike were smart about it. They hired Mike's younger sister to be the librarian. They paid her $1 per week to manage the library, taking money, keeping time, maintaining order, and restocking the shelves. They also let her read all the comics she wanted for free, which she loved. The library was only open for a few hours on Saturdays after Robert and Mike finished their work at the store. yet it averaged $9.50 per week in revenue. After paying Mike's sister her $1 salary, they split about $8.50 between them, over $4 each. They had gone from earning 30 cents per week at 10 cents per hour to earning over $4 per week. But here's what was most important. They were earning this money without being there. While they were dusting cans at the store, Mike's sister was running the library and collecting money. While they were at home doing homework or playing with friends, the library was generating income. They had created a small business that worked for them, rather than working for money. The library ran successfully for about 3 months before a fight broke out between some kids, and parents started complaining. Rather than deal with the hassle, Robert and Mike decided to shut it down. They had learned what they needed to learn. They had discovered how to identify an opportunity, free comics that others saw as trash, how to create value, organizing them into a library, how to serve customers, offering affordable entertainment, how to hire and manage employees, Mike's sister, and most importantly, how to make money work for them even when they weren't working. This experience taught them lesson 1 in a way no lecture or book ever could. The rich don't work for money. They create systems and assets that generate money for them. Lesson 2, why teach financial literacy? Rich Dad shared a sobering story with Robert to illustrate why financial literacy matters more than simply making money. In 1923, a meeting was held at the Edgewater Beach Hotel in Chicago. This wasn't just any meeting. It was a gathering of some of the most powerful and wealthy men in the world. Among the attendees were Charles Schwab, who owned one of the largest steel companies in America, Samuel Insull, president of the largest utility company, Howard Hopson, president of the largest gas company, Arthur Cutten, a legendary wheat speculator, Richard Whitney, president of the New York Stock Exchange, Albert Fall, a member of the president's cabinet, Jesse Livermore, probably the most successful stock speculator of his time, Ivar Kreuger, head of a large international company, and Leon Fraser, president of the Bank of International Settlement. These men controlled vast fortunes. They had access to the best financial advice available. They were considered financial geniuses of their era. If anyone knew how to make money, it was these men. But here's the shocking part. 25 years later, the fates of these wealthy, powerful men revealed a devastating truth about the difference between making money and keeping money. Charles Schwab died bankrupt, living on borrowed money in the last 5 years of his life. Samuel Insull died penniless as a fugitive in a foreign country. Howard Hopson went insane. Arthur Cutten died insolvent. Richard Whitney had just been released from prison. Albert Fall was pardoned from prison so he could die at home. Jesse Livermore and Ivar Kreuger both committed suicide. Leon Fraser also committed suicide. These weren't men who failed to make money. They made enormous amounts of money, but they didn't know how to keep it, manage it, or build sustainable wealth with it. More money didn't solve their problems. In many cases, it made their problems worse. Rich Dad used this story to drive home a crucial point. Earning a lot of money doesn't make you rich if you don't know how to manage it. In fact, people can be highly successful in their careers, earn impressive incomes, and still struggle financially their entire lives. The problem isn't their earning power. The problem is their financial literacy. This is why lottery winners are a perfect modern example of this principle. Study after study shows that most lottery winners who receive millions of dollars end up broke within a few years. Some end up worse off than before they won. How is this possible? They received huge sums of money with no strings attached. They didn't have to pay it back. It was free money. The answer is simple. They knew how to spend money, but they didn't know how to manage it, invest it, or make it grow. Without financial literacy, more money just means more spending. The amounts get bigger, but the pattern stays the same. They buy bigger houses, fancier cars, expensive gifts for friends and family. They invest in business deals they don't understand. They trust the wrong people. The money flows out faster than it came in, and eventually it's all gone. Rich Dad emphasized that before Robert learned how to make money, he needed to understand what money actually is and how it works. He needed to become financially literate. Only then would he have any hope of building and maintaining real wealth. Most people go to school and study subjects like math, science, history, and literature. These subjects are important for getting good grades and qualifying for certain jobs. But schools don't teach financial literacy. They don't teach students how money works, how to manage it, how to invest it, how to make it grow. As a result, people graduate, get jobs, start earning money, and have absolutely no idea what to do with it. They follow the pattern they saw their parents follow. Earn money, pay bills, save a little if possible, hope for the best. For most people, this leads to a life of quiet financial struggle. Never quite having enough, always worried about unexpected expenses, hoping their job will last until retirement. Rich Dad said that financial literacy is the foundation upon which wealth is built. Without it, everything else crumbles. You can have the best job, the highest income, the most expensive education, but without financial literacy, you'll likely struggle with money your whole life. He compared it to building a skyscraper. If you want to build the Empire State Building, one of the tallest buildings in the world, you first have to dig a deep hole and lay a strong foundation. The taller the building, the deeper and stronger the foundation must be. But if you want to build a small house in the suburbs, you can get away with a shallow foundation, maybe just a 6-inch concrete slab. The problem, Rich Dad explained, is that most people try to build Empire State Building-sized dreams and expectations on a 6-inch foundation of financial knowledge. They want to be wealthy, they want financial security, they want to retire comfortably. But they're building these dreams on a foundation of financial ignorance. When pressure comes, a job loss, a medical emergency, an economic downturn, everything collapses because the foundation can't support it. Poor Dad represented the school system's approach. He believed deeply in education, but his definition of education was narrow. Study hard, get good grades, find a secure job with good benefits, work your way up the ladder. He emphasized academic excellence because that's what the school system rewarded. But Rich Dad saw a huge gap in this approach. Schools teach people how to become employees, not employers. They teach people how to work for money, not how to make money work for them. They teach people to seek job security, not financial independence. The irony is that poor Dad followed this path perfectly. He got his PhD, became a respected educator, had a secure government job with excellent benefits. He did everything right according to the school system's definition of success. Yet he struggled financially. He couldn't understand why, with all his education and intelligence, money was always a source of stress rather than freedom. Rich Dad, who never finished middle school, understood something the formal education system didn't teach. Financial literacy is the key to wealth, not academic credentials or job titles. One of Rich Dad's favorite sayings was KISS, keep it simple, stupid. He believed that many people, especially highly educated people, overcomplicate things. They use complex language, complicated formulas, sophisticated analysis. This makes them feel smart, but it often obscures simple truths. Rich Dad taught Robert and Mike using simple pictures and simple language. He didn't want them confused by accounting terminology or financial jargon. He wanted them to understand the fundamental concepts so deeply that they became second nature. The most fundamental concept of all, according to Rich Dad, was understanding the difference between assets and liabilities. He said if you want to be rich, all you need to do is one thing: buy assets. That's it. That's the entire formula for wealth. Just buy more assets than liabilities. It sounds absurdly simple, and that's precisely why most people don't take it seriously. Robert and Mike couldn't believe it at first. They thought Rich Dad was joking. If becoming rich was really that simple, everyone would be rich, right? But as Rich Dad explained, it's simple to understand but difficult to execute. The difficulty isn't in understanding the concept. It's in having the discipline to actually do it consistently year after year, despite all the temptations to do otherwise. Rich Dad gave them the simplest possible definitions. An asset is something that puts money in your pocket. A liability is something that takes money out of your pocket. That's it. Nothing more complicated. If something causes money to flow into your pocket, month after month, year after year, it's an asset. If something causes money to flow out of your pocket, through payments, maintenance, expenses, it's a liability. Rich Dad didn't care about the technical accounting definitions. He didn't care about what banks or financial advisors said. He cared about cash flow. Does money flow in or does money flow out? That's the only question that matters. To make this even clearer, Rich Dad drew simple diagrams showing how money flows for different types of people. These diagrams consisted of two parts. The top part was an income statement, also called a profit and loss statement. This showed two things: income, money coming in, and expenses, money going out. It's like a pipe. Money flows in from one end, your job, your businesses, your investments, and flows out the other end, your bills, purchases, living expenses. The bottom part was a balance sheet. This showed two columns: assets, things you own, and liabilities, debts you owe. The balance sheet is supposed to balance assets against liabilities, hence the name. What many people don't understand is how these two statements are connected. Your assets should create income, money flowing into the top part. Your liabilities create expenses, money flowing out of the top part. This is the crucial connection that most people miss. The cash flow pattern of an asset. Your asset, shown in the bottom part of the diagram, creates income, shown in the top part. For example, if you own a rental property, that property sits in your asset column. Every month, it generates rental income, which flows into your income column. The money comes in. The cash flow pattern of a liability. Your liability, shown in the bottom part, creates expenses, shown in the top part. For example, if you have a car loan, that loan sits in your liability column. Every month, it requires a payment, which shows up as an expense. The money goes out. This seems simple, and it is. But most people don't think this way. They think about objects, not cash flow. They think, I own a house, so that's an asset. They don't ask the critical question: does this house put money in my pocket or take money out? Rich Dad gave a clear example to illustrate the difference. Suppose you buy a house, but instead of living in it yourself, you rent it out to someone else. Every month, the tenant pays you rent, let's say $1,500. That rental income flows into your pocket. Of course, you have expenses too. You might have a mortgage payment of $900, property taxes of $200, insurance of $100, and occasional maintenance costs. So your total expenses might average $1,300 per month. But here's the key. The rental income, $1,500, is greater than the expenses, $1,300. Every month, $200 flows into your pocket. This is an asset. It puts money in your pocket month after month, year after year. Even better, in most cases, the value of the property itself will appreciate over time, and eventually the mortgage will be paid off, increasing your cash flow even more. Now consider a different scenario. You buy a house to live in yourself. You have the same $900 mortgage payment, $200 in property taxes, $100 in insurance and maintenance costs. But there's no rental income. Money only flows out of your pocket. $1, $200 every month, month after month, for 30 years. This is a liability, not an asset, even though most people call their home their biggest asset. Rich Dad explained that even many highly educated people, including accountants and financial planners, confuse assets and liabilities. They've been taught certain definitions in school that don't focus on cash flow. A traditional accountant might say your home is an asset because it has value and you own it. But Rich Dad's definition cut through all that complexity. Does it put money in your pocket or take money out? If it takes money out, it's a liability, period. This confusion causes people to make poor financial decisions. They think buying a bigger house is building wealth because they're accumulating a bigger asset. But if that house costs more each month in mortgage, taxes, insurance, and maintenance, they're actually taking on a bigger liability. Their expenses increase, but their income doesn't. They're moving backward financially, not forward, but they don't realize it because they're using the wrong definition of asset. Robert explains that often, people in debt think the answer is to make more money. But more money frequently doesn't solve their problems. It can make them worse. This is why many people who get sudden wealth through lottery winnings or inheritances quickly burn through it. When cash increases, their spending increases proportionally or even more. They never learn to manage money, so more money just means bigger problems. Rich Dad drew out how the three main classes of people handle money differently, and these diagrams explained why they stay in their respective financial positions. For a poor person, the diagram is tragic in its simplicity. Income comes in, usually from a job, and it immediately flows right back out to cover expenses. There's nothing left over. The asset column is empty. The liability column might have some small debts, maybe a credit card balance or a payday loan. A poor person earning $2,000 per month might spend $400 on rent for a small apartment, $300 on food, $200 on transportation, $150 on utilities, $100 on taxes, and $850 on other living expenses and emergencies. That's $2,000 out with zero left over. There's no money to buy assets. There's no investment in anything that might generate future income. Every dollar earned goes right back out the door. This creates a hopeless situation. Without assets to generate additional income, the only way to increase income is to work more hours or get a better job. But if spending patterns don't change, any increase in income will just result in increased spending. They're stuck. The middle-class pattern is more complex but equally problematic. Income comes in from a job, usually a decent salary, perhaps $5,000 or $6,000 per month or even more. But then look at where the money goes. They have a mortgage payment on their house, which they mistakenly believe is an asset. They have a car payment or maybe 2 car payments. They have credit card payments. They have student loan payments. They have property taxes, homeowners insurance, car insurance, life insurance, health insurance. They have utility bills. They have grocery expenses. They have entertainment expenses. They have expenses for their children's activities and education. The list goes on and on. What makes the middle-class pattern particularly insidious is that their liability column is full of things they think are assets or investments in their future. They believe their home is building equity, though they'll be paying interest on it for 30 years. They believe their car is necessary for work, though it loses value every single day. They believe their good credit allows them to afford a better lifestyle, though it's really just allowing them to go deeper into debt. At the end of each month, after all the bills are paid, there's little or nothing left. They might put a small amount into savings or a 401k, but their asset column remains relatively small compared to their liability column. They're working hard, earning decent money, but they're trapped in the rat race just like the poor person, just running faster on a bigger wheel. Rich Dad explained that this is why the middle class often feels so much financial stress. They're earning more than poor people, so they should feel more secure, right? But they don't. They feel more stressed because they have more to lose. They have bigger mortgages, bigger car payments, bigger expectations. One job loss could be financially devastating because their expenses are so high. The rich person's diagram looks completely different. Yes, they might have income from a job or profession, but that's not the interesting part. The interesting part is their asset column, which is large and full. They own businesses that generate profit even when they're not working. They own rental properties that generate monthly income. They own stocks and bonds that pay dividends and interest. They own intellectual property, patents, books, music that generates royalties. Their assets work for them 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, generating money whether they're awake or asleep, whether they're working or on vacation. Here's the crucial difference. The rich person's income comes primarily from their assets, not from their job. Even if they have a job, they're not dependent on it because their assets generate enough income to cover their expenses. Their liability column, meanwhile, is relatively small. They might own an expensive home, but only after their assets are generating enough income to easily afford it. They might have some debts, but these are usually good debts. Money borrowed at low interest rates to purchase income-generating assets. The rich person's expenses are covered by income from their assets. This means they can afford to reinvest any income from their job entirely back into buying more assets. And as they buy more assets, those assets generate more income, which allows them to buy even more assets. It's a virtuous cycle that compounds over time. This is why the rich keep getting richer. They're not working harder than middle-class people. Often they work less. But their money is working hard for them. Every dollar they have is employed, generating more dollars, which are then employed to generate even more dollars. Rich Dad's formula for wealth was simple. Keep your liabilities and expenses low. Build your assets. When your income from assets exceeds your expenses, you're wealthy. Notice that Rich Dad didn't define wealth as having $1 million or any specific amount of money. He defined it as a ratio. asset income compared to expenses. You could theoretically be wealthy with modest assets if your expenses are low enough. Conversely, you could have millions and not be wealthy if your expenses consume everything you earn. This led Rich Dad to his definition of financial independence or wealth. Wealth is a person's ability to survive so many days forward. Or put another way, if you stopped working today, how long could you survive financially? If your assets generate $3,000 per month and your expenses are $3,000 per month, you can survive indefinitely without working. You're financially independent. You're wealthy. It doesn't matter if you have $500,000 or $5 million in total assets. If those assets cover your living expenses, you're free. This is a revolutionary way of thinking about wealth because it shifts the focus from accumulation to cash flow. It's not about having the biggest number in your bank account. It's about creating enough passive income to support your lifestyle. One of the most controversial points Robert learned from Rich Dad, and one that generated the most pushback when he later wrote about it, was the assertion that your home is not an asset, it's a liability. This contradicted everything Poor Dad believed. Poor Dad was proud of his home. He saw it as his most important investment, his security for retirement, proof of his success. The American dream, after all, includes owning your own home. But Rich Dad forced Robert to look at the cash flow. When Poor Dad bought his house, he took out a 30-year mortgage. Every month, he had to make a payment. He also had to pay property taxes. He had to pay for homeowners insurance. He had to pay for maintenance, roof repairs, plumbing issues, yard work, and all the endless small things that homes require. Money flowed out of his pocket every single month. For 30 years, a substantial portion of his paycheck went to house-related expenses. Even worse, most of the early payments went almost entirely to interest, not principal. The bank was earning money on him, not the other way around. Rich Dad didn't say people shouldn't own homes. He said they shouldn't fool themselves into thinking a home is an asset when its cash flow pattern clearly identifies it as a liability. And more importantly, he said they shouldn't buy a house until after they've built enough assets to easily afford it. The typical pattern Rich Dad observed was this. A young couple gets married. They rent for a while, saving money. Then everyone, their parents, their friends, their coworkers, even their banker, starts telling them they need to buy a house. You're throwing money away on rent, they say. A house is an investment. Build equity. Get a tax deduction. So they buy a house, taking on a 30-year mortgage. Now they're locked in. They have to keep their jobs to make the mortgage payment. They can't take risks or pursue opportunities that might require relocation. They can't save as much because the house expenses consume their income. They can't invest in income-generating assets because they're already in debt. They're trapped, though they call it home ownership and think it's a good thing. Rich Dad's alternative approach. First, build your asset column by investing in income-generating assets. As those assets grow and generate more income, use that passive income to pay for your house. This way, you're not trapped by your house, your assets are carrying it for you. Robert emphasized that understanding these concepts, truly understanding them at a deep level, changes everything. It's not just intellectual knowledge. It's a fundamental shift in how you see money and financial decisions. Once you understand cash flow patterns, you start seeing them everywhere. You look at someone buying an expensive car and realize they're taking on a liability that will drain thousands of dollars from them every year in payments, insurance, maintenance, and depreciation. You look at someone buying rental property and see them building an asset that will pay them every month. You start making different decisions. When you get a raise, instead of automatically upgrading your lifestyle, bigger house, fancier car, more expensive restaurants, you ask yourself, should I use this extra money to buy more assets? When you're tempted to buy something expensive, you ask, is this an asset that will generate income or a liability that will cost me money? This is why Rich Dad insisted on teaching financial literacy before anything else. Without this foundation, nothing else works. You can earn a huge income and still struggle financially. You can get lucky with one investment and still end up broke. But with solid financial literacy, you can build real, lasting wealth regardless of your starting point. Lesson 3. Mind your own business. Robert shares a story about Ray Kroc, the founder of McDonald's, that perfectly illustrates the third lesson. In 1974, Ray Kroc was invited to speak to MBA students at the University of Texas at Austin. After giving an inspiring talk about entrepreneurship and business, he agreed to join the students at their favorite bar for drinks. The students were excited to be casually drinking beer with one of the most successful businessmen in America. During the conversation, Ray suddenly asked them a question: "What business am I in?" The students laughed at what seemed like an obvious question. They answered enthusiastically, "You're in the hamburger business. You run McDonald's, the biggest hamburger chain in the world." But Ray Kroc shook his head. He told them, "That's what I thought you'd say. But I'm not in the hamburger business. I'm in the real estate business." The students were confused. McDonald's sells hamburgers, fries, and milkshakes. How is that real estate? Ray explained his philosophy. He understood that the real value of McDonald's wasn't in selling burgers. Lots of restaurants did that. The real value was in owning the land under each franchise. He knew that the location and the land were the most significant factors in each franchise's success. The hamburgers were just a means to an end. The real business was acquiring and controlling valuable real estate. Today, McDonald's is the largest single owner of real estate in the world. The company owns some of the most valuable intersections and street corners across the globe. Many people don't realize this because they see the restaurants and the golden arches. But Ray Kroc saw deeper. He minded his own business, which was real estate, even though his profession appeared to be fast food. This story led Rich Dad to teach Robert a critical distinction that most people never understand: the difference between your profession and your business. Rich Dad would often ask people, "What's your business?" They would respond with answers like, "I'm a banker, I'm a teacher, I'm an engineer, I'm a doctor." Then Rich Dad would ask, "Do you own the bank? Do you own the school? Do you own the engineering firm? Do you own the medical practice?" Almost always, the answer was no. "No, I work there," they'd say. That's when Rich Dad would point out their confusion. Being a banker is their profession, what they do for a living, how they earn money. But their profession is not their business. Your business is what you own, what works for you, what builds wealth for you even when you're not actively working. This confusion is widespread and financially devastating. People spend their entire lives building someone else's business, their employer's business, while neglecting to build their own. They give 40, 50, 60 hours a week to make their company profitable, their boss wealthy, their shareholders rich. But they don't put equivalent effort into building their own wealth. Rich Dad broke down a sobering reality. Most people work for everyone except themselves. Let's look at where your money actually goes when you earn it. First, you work for your employer. You trade your time, energy, skills, and knowledge for a paycheck. Your employer gets the value of your work and you get wages. In many cases, the value you create far exceeds what you're paid. That difference is your employer's profit. Second, you work for the government. Taxes are taken out of your paycheck before you even see it. Depending on where you live and how much you earn, this could be 20%, 30%, 40%, or even more of your income. You have to work several months each year just to pay your taxes. Third, you work for the bank. If you have a mortgage, car loan, student loans, or credit card debt, a significant portion of your paycheck goes to paying off these debts plus interest. The bank is making money from your labor. Fourth, you work for the store. You spend money on things you need and want: groceries, clothes, gas, entertainment, and countless other purchases. Businesses profit from your spending. By the time you've paid your taxes, your mortgage, your car payment, your credit card bills, your student loans, and your living expenses, what's left? For most people, not much. Maybe nothing. Sometimes less than nothing, which means more debt. So who did you work for all month? Everyone except yourself. You made your employer richer, you funded the government, you paid interest to banks, you generated profits for corporations. But what did you do to build your own wealth? Probably very little or nothing. This realization can be depressing, but Rich Dad said it should be motivating. It should wake you up to the reality that you need to mind your own business, to focus on building your asset column, not just someone else's. Rich Dad clarified that minding your own business doesn't necessarily mean quitting your job and starting a company, though for some people it might. For most people, it means keeping your day job while simultaneously building your asset column outside of work. Your business revolves around your asset column, not your income column. Your income column might say software engineer or teacher or sales manager. That's your profession. But your business is the real estate you own, the stocks you invest in, the side business you're building, the intellectual property you're creating. Rich Dad's advice was pragmatic. Keep your daytime job. It provides the income you need to live and, crucially, to invest. But don't make the mistake of thinking your job is your business or your path to wealth. Your job is a tool to fund your real business, which is building assets. Rich Dad emphasized that parents need to teach this concept to young people before they leave home. If children understand what a true asset is before they enter the workforce, they won't fall into the trap that catches most people. The typical pattern is graduate from college, get a job, start earning decent money, feel successful, and then immediately start accumulating liabilities. They buy a new car, liability. They rent an expensive apartment, expense. They buy nice furniture, clothes, electronics, liabilities that depreciate. They go out to eat frequently, take vacations, spend money socializing. Then they get married and the spending accelerates. They buy a house with a 30-year mortgage, liability. They have kids, which increases expenses dramatically. They buy a bigger car, maybe an SUV, liability. They upgrade their house as their income increases. They're trapped in a lifestyle of debt, working hard just to maintain it. But imagine if, instead, a young person started their first job understanding assets versus liabilities. They would live modestly, keeping expenses low. They would take a significant portion of their income, maybe 20%, 30%, or even 50%, and invest it in income-generating assets. They would do this consistently, month after month, year after year. By the time they were 30 or 35, they would have built a substantial asset column. Their investments would be generating significant passive income. At that point, they could afford to buy a nice house and car, but their assets would be paying for these things, not their job. They wouldn't be trapped. They would have options. They would be on the path to financial independence. Rich Dad gave Robert specific categories of assets to focus on. These aren't just theoretical concepts. These are actual things you can own that will generate income. 1. Businesses that do not require your presence. This is the most important category. Rich Dad emphasized that if you own a business but you have to be there working in it every day, you don't own a business, you own a job. The goal is to build or buy businesses that are managed and operated by other people while you own them. Robert learned this principle early with the comic book library. He and Mike created the system, but Mike's sister ran it. They were earning money while doing other things. That's a true business, a system that generates income independent of your time. 2. Stocks. Owning shares of companies means you own a small piece of businesses. If you choose well, these companies will grow in value, and many will pay you dividends, regular payments just for being a shareholder. You can earn money while sleeping because your stocks are working for you. 3. Bonds. These are essentially loans you make to corporations or governments that pay you interest. You lend money, and they pay you back with interest over time. This passive income. 4. Income-generating real estate. This means rental properties, commercial buildings, land that you lease, any real estate that puts money in your pocket rather than taking it out. Notice the emphasis on income-generating. Real estate you live in isn't in this category because it costs you money instead of making you money. 5. Royalties from intellectual property. If you write a book, record music, invent something and patent it, create art, or develop any other intellectual property, you can earn royalties. This means getting paid over and over again for something you created once. Musicians earn royalties every time their song plays. Authors earn royalties every time their book sells. You create it once and potentially earn from it for decades. 6. Anything else that has value, produces income or appreciates, and has a ready market. This catch-all category includes things like valuable collectibles that appreciate, art, rare coins, antiques, equipment that you rent out, businesses you invest in as a silent partner, peer-to-peer loans where you earn interest, and various other creative assets. Rich Dad added an important caveat. Acquire assets that you love. This is about more than just financial returns. When you're passionate about your investments, you'll take better care of them, you'll learn more about them, and you'll make better decisions regarding them. Robert shares that he loves real estate. He enjoys looking at properties, analyzing deals, negotiating purchases, managing investments. Because he loves it, he spends time thinking about it and shopping for opportunities. This passion leads to better results. Rich Dad warned against investing in things you don't understand or don't care about just because someone tells you it's a good investment. If you hate the idea of being a landlord, don't buy rental property no matter how good the numbers look. You won't manage it well. If you don't understand the stock market and find it boring, don't force yourself to become a stock picker. You'll make poor decisions. Find the types of assets that match your interests and personality. This makes the process of building wealth more enjoyable and sustainable. Robert practices what he preaches. Even when he had a well-paying job at Xerox Corporation, he understood that his job wasn't his business. It was just his profession, his source of income. During his Xerox years, he kept his day job and did it well, but he didn't define himself by it or see it as his primary path to wealth. Instead, he focused his mental energy and extra time on building his asset column. He studied real estate. He looked for investment properties. He learned about different types of investments. He started small businesses on the side. The steady income from Xerox provided the capital he needed to invest. The more he understood accounting and cash management through his business activities, the better he became at analyzing potential investments. Eventually, he was able to build his own company, but he didn't jump into that until his assets were already generating significant income. This is the path Rich Dad advocated for most people. Keep the security and income of your job while building your assets on the side. Don't be in a hurry to quit your job. Use it strategically as a funding source for your real business, which is your asset column. Rich Dad's strategy was straightforward but required discipline. Keep your expenses low. Don't inflate your lifestyle every time you get a raise. Live below your means, not at them or above them. The difference between your income and your expenses is your investment capital. Reduce liabilities. Pay off consumer debt. Avoid taking on new debt for things that don't generate income. Be very cautious about any financial obligation that will require monthly payments. Diligently build a base of solid assets. Take the money you save from keeping expenses low and reducing liabilities, and invest it in real assets. Do this consistently. Month after month, year after year, keep building that asset column. As your cash flow grows from your assets, you can start to indulge in luxuries. But, and this is crucial, only buy those luxuries if your cash flow from assets supports them. Don't buy a luxury car with your salary. Buy it with the income generated by your assets. This way, your assets are rewarding you, and you're not going backward financially. Build the asset column first. Let the income generated by those assets pay for luxuries later. When your assets generate enough income to cover a luxury purchase, that's when you know you can truly afford it. This approach requires patience and delayed gratification, which is why most people don't do it. They want the luxury now. They'll finance it, justify it, convince themselves they deserve it. But this impatience keeps them trapped in the rat race forever. The person who minds their own business, who patiently builds their asset column before indulging in luxuries, will eventually have both the assets and the luxuries. The person who buys luxuries first might have the appearance of wealth for a while, but they'll likely struggle financially for their entire life. Lesson 4: The history of taxes and the power of corporations. Most people grow up hearing the story of Robin Hood and thinking he was a hero. He robbed from the rich and gave to the poor. He fought against injustice. He stood up for the oppressed. In popular culture, he's celebrated as a champion of the common people. But Rich Dad had a different perspective. He called Robin Hood a crook. He didn't admire the idea of taking from one group to give to another, regardless of the justification. More importantly, he understood that the Robin Hood mentality, the idea that the rich should be punished and their wealth redistributed, ultimately hurts the very people it claims to help. The popular sentiment even today is that the rich should pay more in taxes, that wealth should be redistributed, that taking from the wealthy to give to the poor is morally correct. Politicians get elected on these promises. People vote for these policies thinking they'll benefit. But Rich Dad pointed out a harsh reality. In practice, it's not the rich who end up paying the most in taxes. It's the middle class, especially the educated upper-income middle class. The rich have ways to legally minimize their tax burden that the middle class doesn't understand or can't access. Meanwhile, the poor often pay little or no income tax but face other financial burdens. The middle class ends up carrying the heaviest tax burden, working harder and harder to pay increasing taxes while building very little wealth themselves. This is the tragic irony of the Robin Hood mentality. It punishes those it claims to help. To understand how this happened, Rich Dad gave Robert a history lesson about taxes in England and America. Originally, there were no income taxes. None. People kept everything they earned. Governments funded themselves through tariffs, excise taxes on specific goods, and occasional emergency levies to pay for things like wars. These emergency taxes were temporary. They were raised when needed and discontinued when the need passed. This system worked for centuries. Government was limited in size and scope, so it didn't need massive amounts of money to operate. In 1874, England made income tax permanent. This was a revolutionary change. For the first time in English history, the government claimed the right to take a percentage of every citizen's income every year, in perpetuity. It wasn't framed as a temporary war measure. It was framed as a permanent feature of the system. How did the government get people to accept such a radical change? Simple. They promised it would only affect the rich. The tax rates were structured so that only the wealthiest citizens paid anything significant. The middle class and poor paid little or nothing. So when it came to a vote, the majority of people supported it. After all, they weren't going to be taxed, only those rich people would be. In 1913, America followed suit. The 16th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution was ratified, making income tax permanent in America. Just like in England, the tax was sold to the public as something that would only burden the wealthy. The initial rates were very low, and they only applied to the highest earners. The average American would barely be affected. People bought it. The income tax amendment passed because the majority believed it would punish the rich and barely touch them. But here's what actually happened, as Rich Dad explained. Once the income tax was established and accepted as legitimate, it began to grow. The government's appetite for money grew. The programs expanded. The bureaucracy increased. And to fund all of this, taxes had to increase and extend to more people. Slowly but steadily, the tax burden trickled down from the wealthy to the middle class and eventually to everyone. The rates that had started at 1 to 7% for the highest earners eventually reached 20%, 30%, 40%, 50% or higher for ordinary middle-class families. The income tax that was designed to punish the rich ended up punishing everyone else instead. The rich, as we'll see, found ways to legally avoid most of it. But the middle class, who had voted for these taxes thinking they'd only affect wealthy people, discovered too late that they had voted for their own financial imprisonment. Today, in most developed countries, the middle class pays the highest effective tax rate. The poor pay little or no income tax. The wealthy structure their finances to legally minimize taxes. But the middle class, especially highly educated professionals with good salaries, gets hammered with taxes at every turn. This historical lesson highlighted a fundamental difference between Poor Dad and Rich Dad's philosophies. Poor Dad represented the government employee mindset. As a high-ranking government official in the education department, Poor Dad believed deeply in the role of government. He believed the government should help people, should provide services, should solve social problems. He believed in public education, public infrastructure, social safety nets, and government programs. In his job, Poor Dad was actually rewarded for spending more money and hiring more people. If his department's budget grew, if he employed more teachers and administrators, if he expanded programs, he was seen as successful. Bigger budgets and more employees meant more influence, more prestige, more success in the government system. Rich Dad represented the capitalist entrepreneur mindset. As a business owner, Rich Dad lived in a completely different world. In business, you're rewarded for exactly the opposite behavior. The fewer people you hire, the less money you spend, the more efficient your operations, the more your investors and stakeholders respect and reward you. Rich Dad had to be profitable or his businesses would fail. Every unnecessary expense came directly out of his pocket. Every inefficiency hurt his bottom line. He couldn't just request a bigger budget when he ran out of money. He had to earn more or cut costs or go out of business. Poor Dad sincerely believed the government should help people, should provide for those in need, should redistribute wealth to create fairness. His intentions were good. He genuinely wanted to make society better. Rich Dad believed individuals should help themselves, that dependency on government created weakness, not strength, that the best way to help people was to teach them to build wealth, not to give them handouts. He believed government intervention usually made problems worse in the long run, even when the intentions were good. For Robert, growing up with these two contrasting worldviews was confusing but ultimately enlightening. It wasn't easy to work for one of the biggest capitalists in town and then go home to a father who was a prominent government leader advocating for more government spending and intervention. Robert found himself in a unique position. He could see both sides. He understood poor Dad's sincere desire to help people through government programs. But he also saw that poor Dad's own financial struggles suggested his approach wasn't working, at least not for building personal wealth. At the same time, he could see that Rich Dad's capitalist approach was producing tangible results: financial independence, growing businesses, increasing wealth. Rich Dad wasn't just theorizing about how money worked. He was proving it through results. This dual perspective forced Robert to think critically rather than just accepting one viewpoint or the other. He had to examine the actual outcomes, not just the intentions or the theories. As Robert studied the history of taxes more deeply, he discovered something fascinating. The rich saw the income tax coming and prepared for it. They found a legal way to protect their wealth from taxation. Corporations. Corporations had been around for centuries, becoming popular in the days of sailing ships and international trade. A corporation is simply a legal entity created by filing documents with the government. It's not a physical thing, not a building, not a group of people. It's a legal fiction, a document that creates an artificial person in the eyes of the law. But this legal fiction has real power. A corporation can own property, sign contracts, earn income, and pay taxes, but here's the key. It pays taxes at a different rate than individuals do. And the really important part, a corporation gets taxed only on its profits after expenses, while individuals get taxed on their income before expenses. Let's see how this works. As an individual employee, you earn $100,000. The government immediately takes out taxes, let's say 30% or $30,000. Now you have $70,000 left to pay your mortgage, car payment, groceries, insurance, everything. You pay for your life with after-tax dollars. As a corporation, your corporation earns $100,000. But before paying any taxes, the corporation can deduct business expenses. Office rent, equipment, vehicles, travel, meals with clients, education, and countless other legitimate business expenses. Let's say legitimate expenses total $60,000. Now the corporation only pays taxes on $40,000 in profit, not the full $100,000. At a corporate tax rate, which is often lower than personal income tax rates, maybe it pays $8,000 in taxes, keeping $32,000 in profit. The individual paid $30,000 in taxes on $100,000 earned. The corporation paid $8,000 in taxes on $100,000 earned. That's the power of the corporate structure, not tax evasion, which is illegal, but tax avoidance, which is legal and smart. Rich Dad explained that the wealthy don't play by the same rules as everyone else, but not because they're breaking the law, because they understand the law better and structure their finances to take advantage of legal benefits that most people don't even know exist. A typical wealthy person might own several corporations. One corporation owns their real estate investments. Another runs their primary business. Another holds intellectual property rights. These corporations pay them salaries, but they also provide many benefits that are paid with pre-tax dollars. Company cars, insurance policies, retirement contributions, education expenses, travel expenses, and more. Meanwhile, a typical middle-class employee gets a paycheck with taxes already taken out, and then has to pay for all of life's expenses with what's left. They're playing a game where they start behind and can never catch up. Rich Dad emphasized that corporations aren't just for giant companies. Small business owners, real estate investors, and even individuals with side businesses can benefit from corporate structures. It's about understanding how the game is played and learning to play it legally and effectively. What Rich Dad really wanted Robert to understand wasn't just the technical details of corporations and taxes. It was the mindset behind them. The rich think differently about money, taxes, and their relationship with the system. Poor and middle-class people often see themselves as victims of the tax system. They complain about high taxes but feel powerless to do anything about it. They think the system is fixed against them, that the rich have unfair advantages, that there's nothing they can do. But Rich Dad pointed out that the tax code is actually full of incentives, legal ways to reduce your tax burden by doing things the government wants to encourage. Want to pay less tax? Start a business? The government wants to encourage entrepreneurship and job creation. Invest in real estate? The government wants to encourage housing development. Invest in oil and gas exploration? The government wants to encourage energy production. Invest in renewable energy? The government wants to encourage clean energy. The tax code isn't just about taking money. It's also about encouraging certain behaviors. But most people never learn this because they only think of themselves as employees, and the tax code offers very few benefits to employees. The real lesson of Lesson 4 isn't don't pay taxes or avoid your responsibilities. It's understand how the system works, play by the rules, but play smart. The rich use corporations and legal tax strategies not because they're greedy or unethical, but because they're financially educated. They understand the game and play it well. Lesson 5. The rich invent money. Rich Dad loved telling the story of Alexander Graham Bell to illustrate how opportunities can be missed even when you've created something valuable. Alexander Graham Bell invented the telephone in 1876. It was a revolutionary invention that would change the world. He patented it, which gave him legal ownership of this groundbreaking technology. But as his business grew, it became difficult to manage. He was an inventor, not a businessman, and the complexities of running a growing company were overwhelming him. So in the late 1870s, Bell went to Western Union, which was the dominant telegraph company and the largest communications company in the world at that time. He offered to sell them his patent and his small telephone company for $100,000. The president of Western Union looked at this offer. $100,000 was a substantial sum in those days. The telephone seemed like an interesting novelty, but was it really worth that much? Would people really want to talk to each other through wires when they could just send telegrams? The president decided the price was too high and rejected the offer. This turned out to be one of the worst business decisions in history. Bell kept his patent and his company. Eventually, it grew into AT&T, American Telephone and Telegraph Company, which became one of the largest and most profitable companies in the world, dominating telecommunications for over a century. Western Union's president had an opportunity to own the future of communication for $100,000. But he couldn't see it. He lacked the vision to understand what the telephone would become. Meanwhile, Bell, who understood the value of what he'd created, went on to build enormous wealth. Rich Dad used this story to make a crucial point. The most valuable asset any person has is their mind. Alexander Graham Bell's mind created an invention worth billions. The Western Union president's mind failed to see the opportunity worth billions. Same opportunity, different results, all because of how their minds worked. Rich Dad had been teaching professionally since 1984, and through teaching thousands of students, he came to realize something profound. Every person has tremendous potential, not just a few gifted individuals. Every human being has the capacity to achieve great things, to create wealth, to solve problems, to see opportunities. So why do so few people achieve financial success? What's stopping them? The answer, Rich Dad believed, was primarily self-doubt. People doubt their own abilities. They doubt they can learn about investing. They doubt they can start a business. They doubt they can achieve financial independence. These doubts create a ceiling on what they're willing to try, limiting their results before they even start. Rich Dad taught that to become financially successful, you need two things: knowledge and courage. Notice it's not knowledge or courage. It's knowledge and courage. You need both. Knowledge without courage leads to paralysis by analysis. People who have this problem study investing endlessly but never actually invest. They read every book, Take every course, analyze every opportunity to death, but never pull the trigger. They're afraid. All that knowledge is worthless if fear prevents action. Courage without knowledge leads to reckless gambling. People who have this problem jump into investments they don't understand because someone told them it was a sure thing. They take risks but don't know how to evaluate them. They're brave but foolish, and they often lose money. But knowledge plus courage is the winning combination. You study enough to understand what you're doing. You learn to evaluate opportunities. You develop skills. But then, critically, you take action despite fear. You make the investment. You start the business. You take the calculated risk. Most people want certainty before they act. They want guaranteed returns. They want no risk. But that's not how wealth is built. The people who become wealthy are those who can handle uncertainty, who can act despite fear, who can take calculated risks when opportunities present themselves. Rich Dad introduced the concept of financial intelligence as different from academic intelligence or IQ. Financial intelligence is the ability to see opportunities, to think creatively about money, to solve financial problems, to recognize value where others don't. He explained that if you train your mind properly, if you increase your financial intelligence, you'll start seeing things that others miss completely. You'll walk down a street and see an investment opportunity in a rundown building. You'll read a news article and recognize how to profit from a trend. You'll meet someone and envision a business partnership. You'll see opportunities everywhere because your mind is trained to recognize them. Most people walk through life financially blind. They see the surface of things but miss the possibilities underneath. They work for money in the most obvious, direct way, trading hours for dollars because that's all they can see. But financially intelligent people see countless other ways to make money that don't require trading time for dollars. Rich Dad promised that if Robert developed his financial intelligence, he would begin inventing money. Not printing counterfeit bills, of course, but creating wealth from ideas, from agreements, from seeing value where others didn't. He would make money from thin air, or more accurately, from the power of his trained mind. To illustrate what he meant by inventing money, Robert shares a detailed example from his own experience in the early 1990s. The economy in Arizona was terrible at that time. The real estate market had crashed. Banks were foreclosing on properties everywhere. Home values had dropped dramatically. The news was full of doom and gloom about the economic crisis. Most people were scared and staying out of the real estate market completely. But Robert and his wife Kim saw this crisis differently. They saw it as an opportunity. While others saw danger, they saw assets being sold at huge discounts. This is financial intelligence, seeing what others miss. Robert found a house that had been worth $75,000 before the crash. Because of foreclosures and the terrible economy, the house was now available for just $20,000. But there was a problem. Robert needed $2,000 as a down payment, and he didn't have it available at that moment. So he went to a friend and explained the situation. He asked to borrow $2,000 for 90 days. In return for the loan, Robert offered to pay his friend $200. A 10% return in just 90 days, which annualized to over 40%. The friend agreed immediately. This was inventing money, using creativity and relationships to make a deal happen even without having the cash on hand. While the purchase was being processed, during the escrow period, Robert ran an advertisement in the newspaper. He offered the same house for $60,000 with no money down and flexible payment terms. Remember, this house had been worth $75,000 before the crash and would likely return to that value or higher as the economy recovered. His phone started ringing immediately. Multiple people wanted the house. Everyone could see it was an incredible deal. A $75,000 house for just $60,000 with no money down. The first qualified buyer who could close quickly got the deal. Here's what happened. Robert bought the house for $20,000, with $2,000 borrowed as a down payment and $18,000 in financing. He immediately sold it for $60,000. After paying back his friend $2,200, $2,000 principal plus $200 interest, paying closing costs and handling other expenses, Robert made approximately $40,000 in profit. Total time invested, about 5 hours. Finding the deal, arranging financing, placing the ad, meeting with buyers, handling paperwork. Money invested $0 of his own money. Profit, approximately $40,000. This is what Rich Dad meant by inventing money. Robert created $40,000 almost out of thin air, or more accurately, out of financial intelligence. He saw an opportunity others were too scared to see. He structured a creative deal. He moved quickly. He made it happen. What made this possible? Several factors. 1. Financial intelligence. Robert recognized that a crashed real estate market presented opportunities, not just dangers. Most people only saw risk and stayed away. Robert saw undervalued assets. 2. Knowledge of the market. Robert understood that the house was worth $75,000 in a normal market. He knew the market would eventually recover. He understood value independent of the current crisis. 3. Creativity. When he didn't have the down payment, he didn't give up. He found a creative solution by borrowing from a friend with an attractive offer. 4. Action orientation. Robert moved quickly while others were paralyzed by fear. In investing, speed often matters. Opportunities don't wait. 5. Understanding human psychology. He knew buyers would jump at a chance to buy a $75,000 house for $60,000 with no money down, even in a scary market. 6. Legal knowledge. He understood how to structure these transactions legally and properly. This is far more sophisticated than just working hard or saving money. This is using your mind as your most powerful asset to create wealth. Robert emphasizes an important principle. Markets go up and down. Investments come and go. The world is always changing, always presenting new opportunities. This constant change isn't something to fear. It's something to embrace and profit from. The world is always handing you opportunities of a lifetime, every single day. But you have to be able to see them, recognize them, and act on them. The more you develop your financial intelligence, the more opportunities will reveal themselves to you. Most people see change as threatening. When the economy shifts, when markets crash, when new technologies emerge, when industries transform, they become anxious. They want stability, predictability, safety. Change threatens their sense of security. But financially intelligent people see change through a completely different lens, through the lens of excitement, not dread. They ask, how can I profit from this change? What opportunities does this create? Who will need help adapting? And how can I provide that help? This mindset shift is profound. When you stop fearing change and start seeing it as the source of opportunities, you've made a critical psychological breakthrough. You'll spend your life looking for opportunities while others spend their life hiding from them. Rich Dad explained that wealth itself has evolved throughout history. 300 years ago, wealth was land. If you owned land, you were wealthy. Land was the primary source of agricultural production, which was the basis of the economy. Kings and lords owned vast estates. Peasants worked the land but owned none of it. The landed gentry were the wealthy class. 200 years ago, as the Industrial Revolution took hold, wealth shifted. Now wealth was in factories and production facilities. The industrialists who owned steel mills, textile factories, and manufacturing plants became the new wealthy class. Land was still valuable, but industrial production created unprecedented wealth. 100 years ago, wealth continued to be in industrial production but also began shifting toward financial assets. The robber barons built empires in oil, steel, railroads, and banking. Wealth was still intangible assets, things you could see and touch. Today, wealth is increasingly in pure information. Information travels around the world at the speed of light. A single piece of software can be replicated infinitely at almost zero cost and sold billions of times. A social media platform can be worth hundreds of billions of dollars despite owning almost no physical assets. Knowledge, data, intellectual property, and information itself are the new sources of wealth. Tomorrow, this trend will accelerate. Information will move faster, change more rapidly, and create wealth even more dramatically. The pace of change will increase, not decrease. This evolution means that the skills and strategies that created wealth in the past might not work as well in the future. Your financial intelligence must be constantly updated. You must keep learning, keep adapting, keep seeing new opportunities as the world changes. Those who try to create wealth using yesterday's methods will struggle. Those who understand today's opportunities and anticipate tomorrow's changes will thrive. Lesson 6. Work to learn, don't work for money. Robert shares a powerful story from a few years ago when he was interviewed in Singapore. The journalist conducting the interview was intelligent, articulate, and professional. As they talked, she revealed something personal. She wanted to become a best-selling author like Robert. She told him she had written several novels. Everyone who read them said they were excellent, beautifully written, compelling stories, wonderful characters. Her friends and family loved them. But despite the quality of her writing, her novels never sold. Only a handful of copies. She couldn't understand why books that were so good couldn't find an audience. Robert asked her about her background. She proudly told him she had a master's degree in English literature from a prestigious university. She had studied under renowned professors. She knew literature, grammar, composition, storytelling. She was extremely well educated in her craft. Then Robert made a suggestion that would change the trajectory of their conversation. You should take some courses in sales and marketing. Maybe get a job at an advertising agency for a year or two to learn how to sell. The journalist's expression changed instantly. She was offended. How dare he suggest she lower herself to learning about sales? She was a serious writer, an artist, a holder of an advanced degree in English literature. She didn't need to learn sales. She needed publishers to recognize her talent. Besides, she said with disdain she hated salespeople. They were manipulative, pushy, dishonest. She would never stoop so low as to become one of them. Robert pointed out a simple fact. I'm a best-selling author. Notice I didn't say I'm a best-writing author. There's a difference. His point was clear. Robert's books might not be the most beautifully written books in the world. There are probably thousands of writers with better technical writing skills. But his books sell millions of copies because he knows how to market them, how to get them in front of people, how to create interest and demand. The journalist refused to accept this. In her mind, quality should be enough. Good writing should sell itself. She would never compromise her artistic integrity by learning something as beneath her as sales. She thanked Robert for his time and left the interview, clearly upset. This story illustrates a principle that business consultants often observe. Many talented people are one skill away from greatness. They have incredible abilities in one area but lack a complementary skill that would unlock their potential. The journalist was an excellent writer. That wasn't her problem. Her problem was that she had no idea how to market her work. She couldn't sell. And in the real world, if you can't sell, you can't succeed no matter how talented you are. This pattern appears everywhere. Brilliant scientists with groundbreaking research that never gets funded because they can't communicate its importance. Talented artists whose work never sells because they don't know how to market themselves. Skilled programmers who create amazing software that nobody uses because they can't attract users. Knowledgeable consultants who can't get clients because they're terrible at sales. Gifted teachers who remain unknown because they can't promote their programs. All of these people have real talent. But talent alone isn't enough. They're one skill away, usually sales, marketing, or communication skills, from turning their talent into success. Robert admits he faced a similar challenge. When he came out of the Marines and decided to get into business, he had a problem. He was incredibly shy about selling. The very thought of selling something to someone made him anxious and uncomfortable. He would literally break out in a sweat. He knew this was holding him back. So he did something many people would consider crazy. He took a job at Xerox Corporation specifically because he was bad at sales. Xerox was known for having one of the best sales training programs in the world. For Robert, the Xerox job wasn't about making money or building a career. It was about fixing a weakness. He deliberately put himself in an uncomfortable situation to force himself to learn a crucial skill. The first few months were brutal. Making cold calls, handling rejection, pushing through his anxiety, it was agonizing. But gradually, with Xerox's training and through sheer repetition, he got better. He learned sales techniques. He learned how to handle objections. He learned how to close deals. He learned how to manage his fear and do the work anyway. After a few years, when Robert felt he had mastered sales well enough, he left Xerox and started his own business. The sales skills he'd learned at Xerox proved invaluable. He could promote his products. He could pitch his ideas to investors. He could negotiate deals. He could handle rejection and keep moving forward. If Robert had skipped this painful learning period, if he had avoided sales because it was uncomfortable, his later success might never have happened. His books might have been just as insightful, but nobody would have heard of them because he wouldn't have known how to market them. This brings us to one of the core philosophical differences between Poor Dad and Rich Dad regarding education and career development. Poor Dad's philosophy says that become an expert in one narrow field. Get your degree, then your master's degree, then your doctorate, going deeper and deeper into one specific area. The more specialized you become, the more valuable you are. Be the best in your field. Poor Dad followed this philosophy himself. He specialized in education, particularly education policy and administration. He had a PhD. He was an expert. He knew more about his field than almost anyone. But Rich Dad observed that specialization had trapped Poor Dad. Yes, he was an expert, but he was completely dependent on that expertise. He needed the education system to exist. He needed his specific job. He had no transferable skills that could create income outside his narrow specialty. When budget cuts threatened his position, he had no alternatives. His deep specialization made him vulnerable, not secure. Rich Dad's philosophy says that learn a little about a lot. Become competent in multiple areas, particularly the areas that support business success. Don't go incredibly deep in one thing, go reasonably deep in several things. This was why Rich Dad had Robert and Mike work so many different jobs growing up. They didn't specialize. Instead, they gained exposure to many different aspects of business. They worked in retail, seeing how stores operate. They saw accounting and bookkeeping. They observed marketing and sales. They watched negotiations. They learned about real estate, hiring, management, customer service, and countless other skills. None of this made them experts in any single area, but it gave them a broad understanding of how businesses work, how money flows, how different pieces fit together. This broad knowledge base proved far more valuable than narrow expertise in one area. According to Robert, the main skills needed for business success fall into three categories. 1. Management of cash flow. This means understanding how money moves through a business or your personal finances. Where does money come from? Where does it go? How do you make sure more comes in than goes out? How do you time your income and expenses? How do you handle seasonal variations? How do you manage credit and debt? How do you make financial projections? People who don't understand cash flow management often have businesses that seem profitable on paper but run out of cash and fail. Or they have personal incomes that should be sufficient but constantly struggle with money. 2. Management of systems. A system is a set of processes that produce consistent results. Successful businesses aren't just a collection of people doing things randomly. They're carefully designed systems where each part works with the others to produce value efficiently. Can you create systems? Can you improve existing systems? Can you identify where a system is breaking down? Can you delegate systematically rather than doing everything yourself? Can you document processes so others can replicate them? 3. Management of people. This is perhaps the most challenging skill. People are complicated. How do you hire the right people? How do you motivate them? How do you give feedback that improves performance without destroying morale? How do you create a culture that attracts talented people? How do you handle conflicts? How do you delegate effectively? How do you fire someone when necessary? Many technically brilliant people fail in business because they can't manage people. They're great at the technical work but terrible at the human side of business. Within these broader categories, Rich Dad emphasized that the most important specialized skills anyone can learn are sales and marketing. Sales is the ability to communicate value to another person and persuade them to exchange their money for what you're offering. This isn't about manipulation or trickery. It's about genuinely helping people see how what you offer can benefit them and making it easy for them to say yes. Marketing is the ability to attract potential customers, create awareness of what you offer, build trust and interest, and bring people to the point where they're ready to buy. These skills apply to everything. If you're looking for a job, you're selling yourself to employers. If you're seeking investors, you're selling your vision. If you're building a business, you're selling products or services. If you're creating content, you're marketing ideas. If you're looking for a partner, you're marketing yourself. Robert admits he constantly works on improving these skills. He attends courses, reads books, studies successful marketers, and practices these skills regularly. He never assumes he's good enough. There's always more to learn about human psychology, persuasion, communication, and influence. Robert notes that most people resist the idea that they need to learn sales and marketing. They have various excuses. I'm too shy. So was Robert. That's why he learned. I'm an introvert. Many successful salespeople are introverts. Sales is beneath me. This is just ego and ignorance. Salespeople are dishonest. Bad salespeople are dishonest. Good salespeople help people. My work should speak for itself. It won't. Nobody will see it without marketing. I'm creative, not commercial. Then you'll be a poor creative person. The resistance often comes from fear, ego, or misunderstanding what sales and marketing really are. But this resistance keeps talented people poor while less talented but better marketed people succeed. Rich Dad encouraged Robert to take a long-term view of his career development. Most people, he observed, work hard to get a secure job, focusing entirely on short-term needs, immediate income, current bills, job security, benefits like health insurance and retirement plans. They're so focused on short-term security that they never think about long-term wealth building. They never ask, what skills should I be learning now that will make me valuable in the future? What experiences should I seek out? What knowledge should I acquire? Instead, Rich Dad advised, seek work that will teach you skills you'll need later. Sometimes this means taking a job that pays less but offers better learning opportunities. Sometimes it means staying in an uncomfortable situation longer than you'd like because you're gaining valuable experience. This requires a different mindset. Instead of asking, how much does this pay? Ask, what will I learn? Instead of seeking immediate comfort, seek growth and development. Instead of optimizing for today, optimize for 10 or 20 years from now. Many people will resist this advice. They'll say they can't afford to take a lower-paying job or to work in an area outside their comfort zone. They need the money now. They have bills to pay. They can't take risks. But Rich Dad would say, that's exactly why you're trapped. You're so focused on immediate survival that you never build the skills and knowledge that would free you from that survival mode. You're running on the treadmill faster and faster but never getting anywhere new. Rich Dad compared career development to going to the gym. Most people resist starting an exercise program. They think about how hard it will be, how uncomfortable, how it will hurt. They make excuses. Too busy, too tired, too old, too out of shape. But if you can push through that initial resistance and just get to the gym, something magical happens. The workout is hard, yes. You're sweaty and tired. But afterward, you feel amazing. You're glad you went. You're proud of yourself. You feel stronger already. The same applies to career development. The idea of learning sales might feel uncomfortable. Taking a job that pays less but offers better learning opportunities might seem scary. Putting yourself in situations where you're not the expert might hurt your ego. But if you push through that resistance and just do it, you'll be so glad afterward. You'll have gained skills that make you more valuable. You'll have opened up new opportunities. You'll be on a path toward freedom rather than remaining stuck in limitation. Robert's own career path illustrates this principle perfectly. After college, instead of immediately pursuing wealth, Robert joined the Marine Corps. This puzzled poor Dad completely. Robert had a good job offer from a company. Why would he give that up to join the military, which paid much less and seemed like a detour from career success? But Robert wasn't thinking about his career in conventional terms. He explained to his father, I want to learn how to fly helicopters. I want to learn how to lead men in difficult situations. I want to understand what it's like to be responsible for other people's lives. I want to test myself under pressure. These weren't things he could learn in a corporate job. The Marine Corps offered experiences and skills that would prove invaluable later, even though they didn't directly relate to making money. After returning from Vietnam, Robert left the Marines and joined Xerox. Again, poor dad didn't understand. Robert could have leveraged his military experience into a better-paying job in aviation or defense. Why sales? Why start near the bottom of a corporate ladder? But Robert had a clear purpose: to overcome his fear of selling and rejection. He knew this weakness would limit him if he didn't address it. So he deliberately chose a job that would force him to confront and overcome that weakness. After several years, once Robert felt confident in his sales abilities, he left Xerox and started his own company. This is when his earlier learning paid off. He knew how to lead people from the Marines. He knew how to sell from Xerox. He knew how to manage multiple aspects of a business from working with Rich Dad. These diverse experiences all came together to create entrepreneurial success. If Robert had taken the safe path Poor Dad recommended, specialize, climb the corporate ladder, focus on job security, he might have had a decent career. But he never would have gained the diverse skills needed to build significant wealth. Rich Dad summarized the choice everyone faces. Most people choose job security. They work hard to be indispensable to one employer in one specific role. They specialize deeply. They become dependent on their job. They trade all their working hours for money from one source. This gives them the illusion of security but actually makes them vulnerable. If that one job disappears, they have few options. Rich Dad advocates skill diversity. Learn many skills. Gain broad experience. Build a foundation that doesn't depend on any single employer or industry. Create multiple ways to generate income. This might feel less secure in the short term but creates real security in the long term because you have options. The employees who feel most secure are often the most vulnerable. They've put all their eggs in one basket, their specialized job. If that basket drops, everything breaks. The people who seem to take more risks by changing jobs, learning new things, and building diverse skills are actually building real security because they have multiple options, multiple income sources, and the ability to adapt to change. Lesson 7. Overcoming obstacles. Rich Dad observed that there are thousands of people who are financially literate. They understand the principles in this book. They know the difference between assets and liabilities. They understand cash flow. They comprehend how money works. Yet despite this knowledge, many of them still don't develop abundant cash flow. They don't achieve financial independence. They remain stuck in the rat race even though they intellectually understand how to escape it. Why? Because knowledge alone isn't enough. There are psychological and emotional obstacles that prevent people from applying what they know. Rich Dad identified 4 main obstacles that stop financially literate people from building wealth. Obstacle 1. Fear. Nobody likes to lose money. Not the poor, not the middle class, not the rich. Everyone fears financial loss. This fear is hardwired into us. It's a survival instinct. Losing resources meant potential death for our ancestors, so we evolved a strong emotional response to loss. The difference between wealthy people and others isn't that wealthy people don't fear losing money. They fear it just as much. The difference is how they handle that fear and whether they let it control their decisions. Rich Dad emphasized, "I have never met a rich person who hasn't lost money. Not one. Every wealthy person has had investments that went bad, businesses that failed, deals that fell through, decisions that cost them significant money. Losses are inevitable in investing and business. But wealthy people don't let the fear of loss stop them from playing the game. They accept losses as part of the cost of playing, learn from them, and keep moving forward. They understand that the gains from their winning investments will far outweigh the losses from their losing investments over time. Poor and middle-class people, on the other hand, let fear dominate their decisions. They're so afraid of losing that they make choices designed to avoid loss rather than to create gains. They play not to lose when they should be playing to win. Robert points out that most people have what's called a balanced portfolio, a mix of stocks, bonds, and mutual funds carefully diversified to minimize risk. Financial advisors often recommend this approach because it's safe. But here's the problem. A balanced portfolio isn't designed to make you rich. It's designed to prevent you from losing everything. It's conservative, defensive, risk-averse. It's playing not to lose. Successful investors don't have balanced portfolios when they're building wealth. They concentrate their investments in areas they understand deeply. They put their eggs in a few carefully chosen baskets and watch those baskets very closely. They take calculated risks that have the potential for significant returns. Yes, this approach carries more risk. Some investments will fail, but the ones that succeed will succeed big enough to more than compensate for the failures. That's how wealth is built. Later, once someone has built significant wealth, they might shift to a more balanced, conservative approach to preserve what they've built. But in the wealth-building phase, a balanced portfolio is too timid. It's playing not to lose when you need to be playing to win. Overcoming fear. How do you overcome the fear of losing money? Rich Dad offered several strategies. 1. Start early and start small. When you're young, you can afford to take risks because you have time to recover from losses. Even small investments teach valuable lessons. The earlier you start, the more time you have to learn from mistakes when they're small. 2. Accept that losses will happen. Stop trying to avoid all losses. That's impossible. Instead, accept losses as tuition in the school of investing. Every loss teaches something valuable if you're willing to learn from it. 3. Focus on the learning, not just the returns. When an investment goes wrong, don't just feel bad about the money lost. Extract every lesson you can from the experience. What did you miss? What should you have noticed? What will you do differently next time? 4. Never invest more than you can afford to lose. This doesn't mean only invest tiny amounts. It means be honest about your financial situation and don't bet everything on one outcome. Keep enough to survive and try again if an investment fails. 5. Take action despite fear. Fear might never completely go away, and that's okay. The goal isn't to eliminate fear, but to act despite it. Feel the fear and invest anyway. Feel the fear and start the business anyway. Feel the fear and take the calculated risk anyway. Obstacle 2. Cynicism. Cynicism is the voice in your head or in your social circle that says, "That won't work. This is too risky. People like us don't do things like that. You're going to fail. That's a scam. You're being naive." Sometimes the cynicism comes from within your own self-doubt and negative self-talk. Sometimes it comes from other people, friends, family, coworkers who project their own fears and limitations onto you. Either way, cynicism keeps you from acting. While fear says, "I might lose," cynicism says, "It won't work anyway, so why try?" It's a more insidious form of resistance because it masquerades as wisdom and caution. Robert shares a perfect example of how cynicism destroys opportunities. He had a friend who attended one of his investment seminars and got excited about real estate investing. The friend found what appeared to be an excellent investment property, well located, priced below market value, with strong rental income potential. The numbers made sense. The friend was about to make an offer when he mentioned the property to his neighbor over the fence. The neighbor, who had never invested in real estate and knew nothing about it, said something like, "I don't know. Sounds risky to me. Are you sure about this? I heard the real estate market might crash. My brother-in-law lost money in real estate once." That was enough. The seed of doubt was planted. The friend backed out of the deal. Someone else bought that property. Within 2 years, it had doubled in value. The rental income was strong. The investor had made an excellent return. Meanwhile, Robert's friend was still renting, still talking about how he should invest someday, still listening to his neighbor's opinions. What happened? A cynic criticized while a winner analyzed. The neighbor criticized what he didn't understand. The successful investor analyzed the actual opportunity, evaluated the real risks and rewards, and made an informed decision. Obstacle 3. Laziness. This might seem counterintuitive. Many people struggling financially work extremely hard. They work long hours, juggle multiple responsibilities, stay busy constantly. How can they be lazy? Rich Dad explained that the most common form of laziness is busy laziness. People stay busy with work, errands, family obligations, and daily tasks as a way to avoid confronting what really matters, their financial situation. They're too busy working to think about how to make money work for them. When busy people say, "I can't afford it," in response to an investment opportunity or financial education, they're often being lazy. They're shutting down thinking rather than asking, "How can I afford it?" "I can't afford it" closes your mind. It's a statement that ends the conversation. "How can I afford it?" opens possibilities. It forces your brain to think, to search for solutions, to get creative. Rich Dad encouraged replacing statements with questions. Instead of, "I can't afford to invest," ask, "How can I earn extra money to invest?" Instead of, "I don't have time to learn about finances," ask, "How can I make time to improve my financial education?" Obstacle 4. Bad habits. Our lives are essentially the sum of our habits. Financial success requires good financial habits. Yet many people maintain habits that keep them poor. The most destructive financial habit is paying yourself last. Most people pay everyone else first: the government, taxes, the landlord or mortgage company, the credit card companies, the utility companies, the grocery store, and then save whatever is left over. Usually, nothing is left over. Rich Dad taught the opposite. Pay yourself first. Before you pay any bills, set aside money for your asset column. Put money into investments, even if it means being short on bill money. This creates productive pressure. When you pay yourself first, you put pressure on yourself to find creative ways to pay the bills. You might work harder, find additional income sources, or cut unnecessary expenses. This pressure forces you to think differently about money and develop stronger financial skills. Overcoming these obstacles. The path to financial independence requires more than knowledge. It requires action despite fear, confidence despite cynicism, prioritization despite busyness, and discipline to maintain good habits. Rich Dad emphasized that everyone faces these obstacles. The difference between those who build wealth and those who don't isn't the absence of obstacles, but the willingness to push through them. To conclude, you understand the difference between assets and liabilities. You know why your house isn't the asset you thought it was. You've seen how the middle class pays the most in taxes while the rich legally pay the least. You know that job security is an illusion and that diversification is often just organized ignorance. You have the knowledge. But Rich Dad met thousands of people with this exact same knowledge who never built wealth. They understood everything you just learned, yet they stayed broke. Why? Because they let fear whisper, "You might lose." They let cynicism say, "It won't work anyway." They stayed busy avoiding what mattered. They paid everyone else first and themselves last. Knowledge without action is just entertainment. You've been entertained. Now what? The rat race doesn't care about your intentions. It doesn't reward people who plan to start investing someday or who are thinking about financial education. It only releases those who actually do something different. Your employer isn't worried about your financial future. The government isn't coming to save you. The school system already failed to teach you this. It's on you. 10 years from now, you'll be somewhere. The only question is, will you be further along the same path you're on now? Or will you be on a completely different one? Because here's the truth Rich Dad understood. The wealthy aren't smarter than you. They're not more talented. They don't work harder. They just made different decisions about money when they had the chance. You have that chance right now. The real question isn't whether you can afford to take risks. It's whether you can afford not to. Start small. Start today. Build one asset. Learn one skill. Take one action your fear doesn't want you to take. Because the life you're living right now is the result of decisions you made years ago. And the life you'll be living 10 years from now is being decided by what you do this week. Stop working for money. Make money work for you. That's the lesson. Now go apply it.